keeping up with our motto, let learning be a joy and teaching a pleasure. Here we are with a remote teaching and learning process to bridge the gap. Happy learning, students.
Hello students. Today we are going to see the chapter from Science and Technology, Part 2. Chapter number 3, that is Life Processes in Living Organisms, Part 2. Life process means the process which is necessary to sustain our life. Various processes are there which are necessary to sustain our life, which we have seen in our lower classes, like nutrition, respiration, excretion, digestion, and so on. From this, in this chapter, we are going to discuss a very important process called as reproduction. Reproduction, a complex law of nature without which the life itself would be lifeless. Yes, students, reproduction is a process which is necessary to sustain our life. And this reproduction is carried out in different ways which are called as modes of reproduction. We have got these two modes of reproduction which is used in all the organisms. First is asexual mode of reproduction, where there is no involvement of the gametes, and the second is sexual mode of reproduction, where there is an involvement of the gametes. So students, in this chapter we are going to discuss about the reproduction carried out in different methods. Starting out in this chapter, the topics which will be covered in this is asexual reproduction in unicellular organisms and asexual reproduction in multicellular organisms. Students, in the lower classes, we have seen about unicellular and multicellular. Unicellular consists of a single cell, whereas multicellular organism consists of more than one cell. That is the simple difference between a unicellular and multicellular. Starting with the part of asexual reproduction in unicellular organism. This reproduction is carried out in three ways. The first one is called as binary fission. The second one is called as multiple fission, and the third one is called as budding. That means in a unicellular organism, a new organism can be formed by any one of these three processes. That is either by binary fission or multiple fission or by budding. Let us see these three methods in detail. Starting with the first one, that is binary fission. The word fission means to break, and binary means two. That means in this method, an organism is divided into two parts. So we called it as binary fission. Now, depending upon the axis of division, this binary fission is divided in different parts. That is simple binary fission, transverse binary fission, and longitudinal binary fission. So depending upon the axis of fission or axis of division of that particular organism, three part types are there. One is simple binary fission, which is observed in amoeba, transverse binary fission, which is observed in paramecium, and longitudinal binary fission, which is observed in euglena. In this part, we are going to see the simple binary fission which is carried out in amoeba. Amoeba, we know that amoeba has got an irregular shape, and since it has got an irregular shape, here the axis of fission or the axis of division is not fixed. When the parent cell gets matured, this amoeba initially starts division. So first the nuclear starts dividing. Now we have seen about the division in part 1 of life process. The nuclear divides. Slowly the cytoplasmic division also starts, and finally a stage is reached where the cytoplasm separates completely and two new daughter cells are formed. Now this particular method of division is called as binary fission. So that is an example of binary fission in for amoeba. The next method of asexual reproduction is by multiple fission. Students, we have seen that fission means breaking. In the last part, it was binary, so it has got divided into two parts. Here it as the name suggests multiple. That means the division, after the division, many cells are formed. So we called it as multiple fission. Asexual reproduction by multiple fission is performed by amoeba and some other similar protists. Now, this stage is carried out in amoeba provided the conditions are not favorable. Because the same example amoeba is used for binary fission also. So, it goes for binary fission when the conditions are favorable, and it goes for multiple fission when the conditions are unfavorable. Amoeba stops the formation of pseudopodia. Pseudopodia is used for the movement of amoeba, and thereby the movement whenever there is a lack of food or any other type of adverse condition, it becomes rounded and form a hard covering around it, which is called as cyst. You can see it in the diagram. The outermost covering is called as cyst. This covering is formed in an amoeba when the conditions are unfavorable. It makes use of this pseudopodia and forms a covering. Inside the covering, many nuclei are formed by repeated nuclear division. That is what you can see in the picture B. Now, once the nuclear division has been carried out, it is followed by cytoplasmic division, and thus many amoebulae are formed. A stage is reached where the cyst breaks open and arrival of favorable conditions. That means when the conditions are favorable, this cyst breaks. And when it breaks, finally, we get many amoebulae are released. You can see it in the picture C. Now, here, since many daughter cells or many daughter amoebas are formed at one time, this particular fission is also called as multiple fission. So, amoeba is an example for binary fission as well as for multiple fission, but the difference is it goes for binary fission when the conditions are favorable, and it goes for multiple fission when the conditions are unfavorable. That is about multiple fission. The third method of asexual reproduction in unicellular is carried out by budding. Bud. Bud means an outgrowth. A simple example here is of yeast. You will see that the yeast cell performs budding. That is a small bud coming out of many parent cells. Yeast cell produce two daughter nuclei by mitotic division so as to reproduce by budding. You can see in the first picture a small outgrowth is there. This outgrowth develops. That outgrowth is called as bud. So the bud is developing. Slowly the nucleus which is present inside it, you can see that it is got shifted over there. A small bulge appears on the surface of the parent cell. This bulge is called a bud. And once the daughter nuclei enters the bud, after sufficient growth, the bud separates from the parent cell and starts to live independently as a daughter yeast cell. So this is how the process of budding is carried out in yeast. So these are the three methods of asexual reproduction in case of unicellular organisms. The next method is asexual reproduction in multicellular organisms. Multicellular organisms, asexual reproduction is carried out in 5 methods. They are fragmentation, regeneration, budding, vegetative propagation, spore formation. Let us see these methods one after the other. The first method is called as fragmentation. Example is Spirogera. Now, this type of asexual reproduction occurs in multicellular organisms like Spirogera. The body of the parent organism breaks up into many fragments, and each fragment starts to live as an independent new organism. And this type of reproduction occurs in algae like Spirogera and sponges like Cycon. So you can see in the picture the parent Spirogera, when it gets mature, it cuts into its fragments, and each part it cuts into two parts, and each part is called a fragment. And this process of reproduction is called as fragmentation. The second method is called as regeneration. Regeneration means to generate a new body. In fragmentation, the same body has got divided into two daughter cells or two daughter spirogeras. But here, from the part, a new body, whole body is generated, so it is called as regeneration. Students, you know that wall lizard breaks up and discards some part of its tail in emergency. The discarded part is regenerated after a period. This is an example of regeneration. Here we have got an example of planaria. Planaria breaks up its body into two parts. That means the whole body, we can see three sections. The head part, body part remains as it is, and the tail part. And each part starts to regenerate. And thus we are getting different planarias are formed. That means a small part of the body is used to regenerate the whole planaria on its own. So this method of reproduction is called as regeneration. The next method is called as budding. Students, just now we have seen about budding in the earlier part. The example was yeast. Here also, the method is the same, only the difference is a multicellular organism. So here we have got an example of Hydra. Hydra, under favorable condition, at specific part of its body, an outgrowth is formed. And we know that this outgrowth is called as bud. So you can see in the picture, first one, a small outgrowth which is called as bud. Bud grows up progressively and finally forms a small hydra. You can see in the next picture, a new hydra is formed. This new hydra will be getting the nutrients from the parents. So this budding hydra separates from the parent hydra and starts to lead an independent life. When it grows up and becomes able to lead an independent life, it will get detached from the parent hydra. So this method of reproduction is called as budding. The next method is called as vegetative propagation. Vegetative propagation means the reproduction carried out with the help of parts like root, stem, leaf, and bud. So when the reproduction is carried out with the help of vegetative parts like root, stem, leaf, and bud, it is called as vegetative propagation. We know various examples related with this. Potatoes. Potatoes, you must have seen in potatoes, they perform the reproduction from the roots with the help of the eyes present on the tuber. So here, the root is used to reproduce the new plant. The next is a very good, interesting example of bryophyllum. The diagram is given in your book. Bryophyllum, it is performed with the help of birds present on the leaf margin. This bryophyllum is considered as a very important medicinal plant, especially for the stone problems. This leaves, when it dries, from the margin of the leaves, the new plant starts reproduction. That means the reproduction is carried out with the help of the leaves. So such reproduction is called as vegetative propagation. And you must have heard about plants like carrot and radish. They perform vegetative propagation with the help of roots. So all this reproduction carried out with the help of vegetative parts. And what are those vegetative parts? Yes, the root, stems, leaves, and bud. Then it is called as vegetative propagation. The last one is called as spore formation. Spore formation. If you see in a wet bread, you will see fungus will be grown if it is kept in the humid place for 2-3 days. And if you observe it under the microscope, you will see the picture like this. Now this is the picture of the fungus like mucus, which have filamentous bodies. These are the filaments. And at the filamentous bodies, they have got sporangia. This sporangia, once the spores are formed, sporangia burst. The bag which is there at the top called as sporangium. This sporangium burst because the number of spores inside that bags are increased. And once the spore bursts, the spores release, the spores germinates in the moist and warm place, and new fungal colonies are formed. That means just as we have seen in multiple fission, similar to that happens here. The bag bursts, and once the bag bursts, the spore scatters, and from that each spore, the new organisms will start carrying out the reproduction. So such method of reproduction is called as spore formation. So in this part, we have seen the two methods of reproduction, that is asexual reproduction in multicellular and asexual reproduction in unicellular. In unicellular, it is carried out by three methods, that is binary fission, multiple fission, and budding. Whereas in multicellular, it is carried out by five methods, that is, the first one is called as fragmentation, second is called as regeneration, third is the same, that is budding, fourth is called as vegetative propagation, and the last one is spore formation. So in the next part, we are going to see the next method of reproduction, that is sexual reproduction in case of plants. Thank you for watching this video. We'll continue the next part in the next video.